Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to be looking at the financial planning problem in the linear programming and finance handout. This is the Hewlett Corporation problem, which is gone through some corporate restructuring, and they have offered their employees some early retirement program. Some employees have opted to take the early retirement programs, about 68 of them, and based upon that, this is the cash requirements over the next 8 years. What this means is that 1 year from now, the company requires $430,000 in cash. 2 years from now, they require 210. 3 years from now, 222,000. 4 years from now, 231, and 8 years from now, they need 255. And after that, they have no more requirements. So no more obligations, right? The corporate treasurer must determine how much money must be set aside today to meet the 8 yearly obligations that have come due. The financial planning has two options. So if they set aside, let's say $1 million, out of the $1 million, you can using those $1 million, you can either buy 3 types of government bonds, or you can set it aside and put it into a high interest savings account. The high interest savings account will produce a return of 4%. So if you put $1, you're going to get 4 cents back. Now, with these government bonds, you see the price here. The par value of the government bonds is 1,000, which means that even with the different prices, when the bond matures, you'll get $1,000 back. So you'll buy the bond for $11.50. You'll earn 8.875% interest, so over 5 years. But when the bond matures, the amount of money you get back is just $1,000 per bond. That's the par value of the bond. So that's how a lot of the bonds work, right? So that's what we are assuming. So any investment that you make now in bond type 1, that's going to mature 5 years from now. So that's going to mature at the beginning of year 5. Any investments that you make in bond type 2 now is going to mature in year 6. And any type make in bond type 3, it's going to mature in year 7, right? But through those 7 years, at the beginning of each year, it's going to pay out interest. Right? So question is, how much money do we set aside now? Now, that does not mean that you cannot make these investments in the future. You can make investments in the future also, which means that, say, for example, 1 year into the future, at the beginning of year 1, you can say, so let's assume that we are in year 0 right now. So at the beginning of year 1, apart from paying down the 430, you can also say, hey, I'm going to buy more of bond 1 because now it's going to mature at the beginning of year 6. Same in year 2, I can buy more of bond 1, it's going to mature in year 7. In year 3, I can buy more of bond 1, it's going to mature in year 8. So any liquid money that I have, I'm going to use that to first do some investment. So pay off what I need to pay off, and then invest money into the other bond types, or just put them as set them aside as in savings account, right? So this is an interesting problem. So let's begin with the decision variables. So in this case, the decision variables themselves are interesting. It's interesting to come up with the decision variables. So let's begin. Okay. So first of all, we have the decision variables will be based upon what kind of investment options we have available. Now, bond type 1, we can do that investment right now, 1 year into the future, 2 years into the future, and 3 years into the future. After year 3, doesn't make sense to invest in bond type 1 because it won't mature before year 8, so we won't get the money back. Similarly, bond type 2, it only makes sense to invest it in year 1 and year 2 because anything that you invest in year 2, you're going to get at the beginning of year 8, and that's all you need. Same goes for bond price 3. You can either invest it now or you can invest it 1 year later, and that's it. Those are the only options that you have, right? So remember, we are in year 0 right now. So 1 year into the future, 2 years into the future, 3 years into the future, and so on. These are the monies that are required. Now that's an assumption that I'm making. You can assume that we are at the beginning of year 1 right now, and do planning based upon that. But that's okay. I mean, whichever way you do it, I'm going to assume that there is a year 0. We're at the beginning of year 0 right now, and these are all the requirements over the next 8 years. Okay, so what are my decision variables? So I'm going to have the following decision variables. First, I'm going to have decision variables. I'm going to call them S1, S2, S3, all the way up to S8, right? Where S1 is the amount set aside in the savings account. The beginning of year 1, right? S2 similarly is the amount set aside savings account at the beginning of year 2. Then you add S3. Beginning of year 3, and so on. I'm gonna and so on, right? So we're gonna do that for all up to S8, right? So that's 8 variables. Apart from that, we also have, I'm gonna call them B11. So this is the number of bond type 1 bonds purchased. Oh, I guess we are going to assume that we are at the beginning of year 1. No, there's no year 0. I'm sorry about that. There is no year 0. BR1 is the number of type 1 bonds purchased at the beginning of year 1. B12 is the number of type 1 bonds purchased at the beginning of year 2. And then you have B13. And that's it. Let's see, does that even make sense? So if you purchase bonds at the beginning of year 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 6 is 3, 4, and 5. Oh yeah, okay. So you can purchase bonds at bond type 1 till the beginning of year 3. Bond type 2, you can only do that for years 1 and 2. 2, 3. So bond 2-1 and 2-2. So this is type 2 bonds. So purchase at the beginning of years 1 and 2. So you cannot purchase type 2 bond at the beginning of year 3. Doesn't make sense because it won't mature in time. Similarly, you can buy type 3 bond at the beginning of year 1. That's the only option we have. Right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 6 variables here and 8 variables here that make it 14 decision variables, right? So these are the types of bonds and these are the monies that are set aside in the savings account, right? Next, the objective. Oh, of course, we forgot the main decision variable. So I'm going to say F is the funds set aside for this project. So this is the total amount of money that is set aside for this project. So I'm going to call it F for funds that are set aside for this project. And the objective is to minimize F, right? You want to set aside the minimum amount of money so that you meet all your obligations over the 8 years, nothing else. You just want to minimize the amount of the amount of money that you need to set aside. So that's our objective, very straightforward, right? Let's write the constraints. Now, what are the constraints that we have here? So if you look at the data, we have constraints on the amounts of money that we need, right? So those are obvious constraints, and yeah, that's it. So we need to write constraints about the monies that we need. but we also have to keep a tally of how much money did we begin with at the beginning of a year, and how much money do we begin with at the beginning of the next year, and so on. So at the beginning of each year, we need to keep track of how much money we have. Right, so let's write the constraint. So you say that at the beginning of year 1, so I'm going to write year 1. At the beginning of year 1, you have F is the amount of money that you have. What are we going to do with this F? So this is the total amount of money that we have. So some of this money we are going to set aside in the savings account, right? And some of this money we are obviously going to use to pay off the first year's obligation, which is 430,000. 430,000, right? Right. So some of the money we're going to use to pay off our obligation. Some of the money we set aside as savings account, and the remaining money we're going to use to buy the bond. So in year 1, you can buy each type 1 bond is 1150 times B11 plus you're going to buy type 2 bonds. So that is 1000 times B21 plus 1350 times B31. So this is the total amount of money that we're going to use to buy the bonds. This is the total amount of money that we have to pay off our obligation, and the remaining money goes into a savings account. So this is an equal to constraint, and in all of these types of problems, you'll always have these equal to constraints. So these are money balance constraints. How much money did we begin with, and how much money are we going to end with? So that's the total money balance constraint that we're going to write. Right? So year 1 was easy, right? Let's begin with year 2. So let's write a year 2 constraint. Right? So year 2 constraint. How much money do we have at the beginning of year 2? So at the beginning of year 2, we have any money that we set aside in the savings account, that is always available as cash. But remember, any money that we set aside, we are earning 4% in interest. So the amount of money that we have available at the beginning of year 2 is 1.04, because we earned 4% interest times S1. So any money that we put in the savings account, right? That's how much money that we have available. Apart from that, we also have interest money that we get from all the bonds that we bought, right? So we purchased, this is how much money that we invested in type 1 bonds, amount of money that we invested in type 2 bonds, and the amount of money that we invested in type 3 bonds, right? So type 1 bonds, type 2 bonds, and type 3 bonds, this is the amount of money that we have invested. So that's the number of types of bonds that we bought, and we know what is the rate of interest that we're going to get, right? Now these rates of interest are obviously calculated on the par value of 1000. So the rates shown are based on the par value. So 8.875% of 1000. So 8.875% of 1000 is $88.75. 5.5% of 1000 is $55. And 11.75% of $1,000 is $117.50. So basically saying that for every bond type 1 that we buy, we're going to get $88.75 per annum, right? So let's do that. So we get $88.75 times the number of type 1 bonds plus $55 times the number of type 2 bonds plus $117.50, 117, right? $117.50 times the number of type 3 bonds. So this is all the interest money that we get. This is all the interest money that we get, and this is the money that we put in the stock, in the savings account, plus interest. So all of this is cash that we have on hand, and this cash has to be equal to all the investments that we make and all the payoffs that we have to do. So what's the payoff in year 2? The payoff in year 2 is 210,000, right? So we're going to pay off 210,000. The remaining money, we're going to buy some more of type 1 bonds. So this is year 2, so we're going to buy type 1 and type 2 bonds. We're going to buy some more of type 1 bonds. we're going to buy some more of type 2 bonds. Right? No type 3 bonds right now. So pay off type 1 bond, type 2 bond, and any remaining money we put it into a savings account. Right? So cash available at the beginning of the year, and this is what we do with it. So this is what we do with it. This is how much money we have available at the beginning of the year. Right? So that's the financial balance constraint for year 2. Similarly, we're going to write a constraint for every year. Right? What I'm going to do is actually let me no, that's fine. Let's write one more year, maybe year 3. So again, 1.04 times the amount of money that you put into savings account previous year plus $88.75 times the total types of total bond ones that we bought. Right? So total number of bond ones that we have plus $55 and total number of bond twos we have plus $117.50 times the number of type 3 bonds we have. So this is all the this is the total amount of money that we have on hand, and this has to be equal to the third year's obligation, which is $222,000 plus. Now in the third year we can still buy some of type 1 bond. I'm gonna spend some money on the type 1 bond, right? And the remaining cash goes into the savings account. Now after the third year we are not buying any more bonds. Any money that we have, we're just going to pay it off and put the remaining in the savings account. How much money do we have? Year 4, right? So 1.04 again times S3 plus $88.70 times type 1 bonds that you bought in the first year, second year, and the third year, plus $55 from the type 2 bonds bought in the first and the second years, plus $117.50 times the type 3 bond which we bought in the first year. So this is the total cash that you're going to have available. This, I'm going to say, has to be equal to the payoff in the fourth year, which is $231,000, right? Plus, so you make a payoff and any remaining cash goes straight into the savings account, right? Let's see, 4, 5. Now any so 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, yeah. So 1.04 times S4 plus all of this is going to be the same. And this has to be equal to the obligation for year 5, which is $240,000 plus S5. Remaining money goes into the savings account. Now year 6 is important because this is when bonds, type 1 bonds from the first year are going to mature, right? So the amount of money is 1.04 times S5. So that much money we're going to have. Plus, now let's write the interest values first. So you have $88.75. That's how much interest you earn. But this time the B11, we're not going to write that because B11 has matured. We're only going to get B12 and B13, right? Now the type 2 bonds have not matured. So I'm going to write B21 plus B22 plus 50 cents times B31 that has not matured, that won't do that to the year 8. So plus, now type 1 bond has matured, right? So B11, so you're going to get $1,000 times B11 back. So B11 is the number of type 1 bonds that you have. You can multiply that with 1,000 because the par value is only 1,000. Even though you paid $11.50 to buy it, the par value is only 1,000. So this is the total amount of money that you can have on hand. With this, you're going to pay off. So for year 6, 195K. The remaining money goes into savings, right? Okay. That. Year 7. So again, 1.04 times S6 plus 88.75 times B13 because these bonds have matured. And now these bonds also have matured, so it's going to be 55 times B22 plus 117 times 0.5 times B31 plus now these bonds have matured and these bonds have matured, so it's going to be B12 times 1,000 plus 1,000 times B22. B21, right? So this is the total cash that you have. So this is the amount of money that you get from the bonds maturing. These are all the interest that you're still earning, and this has to be equal to the payoff in the 7th year, which is 225. So 225, and the remaining money goes into a savings account. And finally, year 8. Okay, year 8. 1.04. I don't know why not 1.04. 1.04 times S7, right? So I guess actually we don't need an S8. So I'm just going to say S7 there, right? And we can have an S8. Probably end up being 0 anyway. So 88.75. No more interest. You're not earning any more interest on the bonds because they're all going to mature. So it's going to be 1,000 times B13 plus 1,000 times B22 plus 1,000 times B31. So all the bonds have matured now, and this has to be equal to 255K. Plus the remaining money goes into a savings account. Now, the money doesn't need to go into a savings account. As long as you have more than 255, you're good. But I don't know if you can plan exactly to be 255. So S8 will just be the excess amount of money. We're not really putting it into a savings account. We're just saying, okay, that's how much extra money that we have left over, right? So these are all our balance constraints, and that's it. So those are our constraints. There really aren't any more constraints, so there's no specific constraints that are given here. So yeah, so that's it. So those are the decision variables, objective function, and constraints. Now, what I am going to do is, for many of these variables or of these constraints, you'll notice that there are lots of variables on the right hand side. I'm going to move all the variables that are on the right hand side to the left hand side and make their coefficients into negatives. Because there are 8 of them, I'm not going to write them out individually. When I type them in, you will notice that. But any numbers that are by themselves, I'm just going to leave them on the right hand side. Okay. So maybe I'll just do this here. This was portfolio. What was it called? Portfolio management, right? and this is financial management. Right. So let's begin with our decision variables. We have f, and we have s1, s2, s3, x, and s8. Right. So apart from that, we have b11, b12, b13, right? And b21 and b22, finally b31. So those are all our decision variables. Apart from that, we're going to have left hand side and right hand side. Okay, so let's put this into the solver and solve them. I'm sorry, put this into the decision variable. So we put down the decision variables. So the objective is pretty straightforward here. It's mostly the constraints that are important here. So these are all our decision variables. I'm gonna color them. These are the decision variables. And the objective is simple. I just want to minimize the value of f. That's it. That's our objective. Let's write the constraint. So we have 8 years worth of constraints. I'm just going to say year 1 up to year 8, right? Okay, so let's write the year 1 constraint. If you notice the year 1 constraint, so it's f, right, minus s1. So s1 goes to the left hand side, so f minus s1. Then b11 got minus 1150 minus 1000 for b21 and minus 1350 for b31, right? Minus 1350. So I'm writing minus here, minus here, minus here because I'm moving all my variables to the left hand side, and the right hand side of the constraint is 430,000. It's 430,000, right? 430,000 is the right hand side of the constraint. Okay, that's good. Next, for year 2. Right. Okay, for year 2, you have 1.04 times S1. Then on the right, then 88.75. 55 and 117.5, right? So they are all on the left hand side already. Then on the right hand side, you have 1150 times B12. This is right. So the 1150 goes to the left hand side, 1000 goes to the left hand side, and then minus S2. Here. And the right hand side is equal to 210. There you go. Okay, now let's write the constraint for year 3. Then for year 4, so starting from year 4, we're not buying anything anymore. We're just earning interest till year 6. For year 5. Okay, now for year 6. Now when you come to year 6, you'll notice that the left hand side of the constraint is we are getting the par value for the first set of bonds that we of type 1 that we bought in year 1. This it's not going to change, but this you're going to get back the par value. Here you're going to get interest values. This doesn't mature. Says 195, right? Yep, 195. Here all constraints are equal to constraints, remember that. So 1.04. 1 here for year 7. So this is done, this investment. So this is going to mature. This is still giving us interest. This is going to mature. This is giving interest. This is still giving us, oops. This is still giving us interest. And this has to be 225. And finally, year 8. Fine. So this is gone. This is matured. So this is going to mature. This is going to mature. This is going to mature. And we need 255. Okay. Right. So now we have all the decision variable, the objective function, and constraints, everything written out here. So let's put in the formulas. The sum product formula. All my decision variables, which I'm going to make absolute references because the objective coefficients right here. I'm going to copy this all the way down. Now they're all equal to constraints. I'm just going to leave them as equal to constraints. Okay, so just right here. So okay, so let's put this into the solver. Right, so the objective is just to minimize the value of f. So minimize the value of f, that's the objective. Right, the changing variable cells, these are all decision variables. And now constraint, I'm just going to add one constraint because they're all equal to constraints. I'm just going to say all the left hand sides have to be equal to all the right hand side values. And that's it, right? Because they're all equal to constraint, I'm just going to write the equal to constraint right here. Then minimize the value of f to do all of this and click on solve. Let's see what we get. Take a couple of seconds. There you go. Right? So that's the final solution. So according to this, all of these are dollar values. No, not all of them. These are all dollar values. Oops. Right, so these are all dollar values. So is this. Okay, so according to this, we have to set aside $1,763,027.12, right? So that's how much money we need to set aside. Out of this, in the first, you're going to pay $430,000, obviously, and the remaining money goes into a savings account, right? In the first year, you're not buying any bonds of type 1. You're buying some bonds of type 2. You're not buying any bonds of type 3. Notice that that's the only thing you're buying. Now, one of the things that you notice here is that these are fractional values for the bonds. Now, that's okay. With bonds, you can buy fractional values in many cases. That is fine. But if you have to impose the extra restriction that these numbers have to be whole numbers only, that you cannot buy fractional values of a bond, now that becomes a completely different kind of problem. But we'll come to that later. We'll do that in the later part of the semester. But here, fractional values are fine. So the only bond you're going to buy is a type 2 bond. You're going to buy that in the first year, and that's it. You're not buying any type 1 bond or type 3 bond. This is likely because you're paying way more than what you're getting back for the bond. So that's basically what it is. And so this is the final solution. And yeah, so all right, take care.